I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which our research infrastructure and our community operate across the Australian continent, and pay our respects to elders past and present. For me today, that's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we recognise the connection they've had with land, sea, sky and waterways for tens of thousands of years. So this is AuScope Convergence, and look, this is a meeting, for those of you that were here yesterday, I apologise if I'm repeating myself a little bit, but I wanted to just give a very brief introduction again today so that people understand, those that are joining us for the first time today, understand what this is about, and I'll just very briefly talk about what we did yesterday and why you should check out the video when we make it available. But this is a conference, this is a workshop that came out of the conference that we ran last year. So last year we ran a full AuScope science conference. And at the end, we had a workshop and we talked about what you would like us to provide to help further the community and improve collaboration and things across the community. And one of the things that very clearly came out was that you wanted us to provide some support around innovation and support around developing collaborative networks and things. So this Convergence workshop is our response to that. And I want you to bear that in mind, because today the focus very much is on the AuScope community talking to each other and working out what it is that AuScope HQ can do to help you outside of your normal everyday sort of science discipline activities, right? So what is it that we can help do to invest in, to either build better community, to provide opportunities for you that you currently don't have? And that's really very much the focus of today. So I'll talk about that a bit more in a second. I just also wanted to very briefly mention what we did yesterday for anyone who's here who wasn't able to see it. So yesterday we had a session with Leah, and Leah talked to us about innovation, and she talked to us about how to prototype things. She talked to us about developing common languages so that we can communicate better. And she talked to us about, she gave us a whole bunch of tools that we can use when we're trying to address how to break down some of these barriers. So as I said, we have recorded that keynote, and we will make that available to you. If you weren't able to see it, I totally recommend that you have a look at that, because it really was a fabulous session. And she brought a design thinking approach to that discussion, which I think is something that's a little bit unique and something that our community, probably many of you haven't had the opportunity to hear or investigate in the past. So, you know, if you're interested in us helping to develop ways for you to continue to think along those lines, then we'd be really happy to do that as well. So, as I said, yesterday we heard from Leah, and she ran us through a workshop. But today is very much looking at our community and talking to you. So the first session that we're running now is going to be like a panel discussion, and I'm going to lead a number of members of the AuScope community through that discussion and ask them questions about their experiences around innovation and around collaboration. So we're going to be hearing from Steve Micklethwaite from Queensland, Sara Palenco from Sydney, Fabian Kohlman from Lithodat, and Maria Seton from Sydney as well. And I'll give all of these panel members an opportunity to introduce themselves in a minute. Then we're going to have a lunch break at about 1:15, or a break for half an hour or so. And then Rebecca's going to lead us through a workshop this afternoon where we try to bring these ideas together. And hopefully you will all be able to pitch an idea to us that we can help to build into a project or a program and continue to invest in over the next few years. Not a science project and not an infrastructure project like we've asked for ideas about in the past. This is a community building, collaboration, innovation, support, something along those lines. And so we're really interested to hear from you what you think is a tangible and realistic thing that we would be able to do that would help you to build that community going forward. So look, I won't bore you too much going through these same slides that I talked to yesterday, because I know many of you saw them yesterday, but I will just start by reminding us that, you know, we operate for a specific reason. We all worked hard to build our strategy, our 10-year strategy, and within that document, we identified a vision, which is to help enable a sustainable and resilient nation through predictive geoscience. And also our mission, which is to build an integrated and collaborative research platform that services and facilitates theoretical and applied geoscientific research. So that is the thing that drives our thinking, as do the national challenges in the geoscience, which relate to discovery of critical minerals to support reduction in carbon, discovery of energy resources and securing clean energy, secure food and water, and understanding the geohazards within our continent. And there are a number of sort of strategic documents, and I talked a bit about them yesterday, so I won't go into too much detail today, but you know, things like the 2021 Research Infrastructure Roadmap, things like the Transforming Australia Progress Report, SDG Progress Report, which has, you know, some fantastic ideas about how to align the research we do with those SDG goals. And also the recently released Critical Mineral Strategy, again, you know, an important document for us to understand what the national needs are in this space and how we can align our innovation to support these national needs. And again, I'll just very, very briefly, I guess, remind us that, you know, there are a number of challenges that we as an organisation have to overcome when we think about how to create better community and how we can develop these collaborative links. You know, and collaborations can be small things. They don't have to be these big sort of science projects. They can just be understanding what we're doing and better linking and making sure that our data is available in a form that other people might be able to use it. So we can think of it as a few very small steps rather than these great big collaborative projects. But one of the challenges, you know, clearly is the geography and the spread of our projects across, you know, 25 partners, including government organisations, including state government organisations, including many universities across the country, and including many international collaborators and partners who we also engage with. And then finally, the other aspect is the scientific complexity. So, you know, we deal in geophysics, we deal in geochemistry, we deal in geochronology, we deal in characterization, we deal in geodesy and geospatial science. We have data delivery platforms that deal in data standards and understanding how data is used and consumed. And then we have all these simulation analysis and modeling packages that build and use that data to add value to it. So we're all geoscientists, but we all are very distinct. We have very distinct needs, and we easily silo ourselves. So as I said yesterday, you know, we've got this great diagram that Joe and Min have put together, which shows all of the things that we do, but there's all these little dotted lines that connect them. And what we're really focusing on is making sure that those dotted lines really are connections and that we understand what we all do and understand ways that we can communicate. And in fact, I guess one little short reflection from yesterday that I had was I ran into Graham Beardsmore in the corridor this morning, and he commented that, you know, one of the best things about yesterday was just being able to spend that time talking to somebody one-on-one and understanding what, you know, other people's issues are and understanding what the challenges are. And so today, very much we will focus on giving you an opportunity to develop, again, those conversations and to try to tell us ways that you think we can improve the way we do that communication going forward. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my slides now. And if you bear with me for a minute, I'm going to find my running sheet, which is hidden behind about 10 screens. There we go. And I am now delighted to be able to introduce our panel that we have today. So I think, Joe, have you been able to pin everyone that we need to pin?
Yes, coming up.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So look, our panel today, as I said, Associate Professor Steve Micklethwaite from the University of Queensland, Dr. Sara Palenco from the University of Sydney, Dr. Fabian Kohlman from Lithodat, an SME that we engage with, but somebody who will be known to many of you from his time at Melbourne University, and Dr. Maria Seton from the University of Sydney. And we asked all of these people to come on because we recognise them as representing different parts of the AuScope ecosystem, they're at different levels of their careers, and they have different experiences that they can bring to a discussion around collaboration and around innovation. So what I'm going to do to start with is I'm going to go around that table and let everybody introduce themselves to you. And I think we've got a couple of minutes each for each person to do an introduction. And so I might start with Maria, since on my screen she's sitting right to my right.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tim. So I'm Maria Seton. I'm an associate professor in the School of Geosciences at the University of Sydney. I'm also a former future fellow. So my research, it focuses on sort of using the marine record to understand global and regional plate motions, to understand the communication between the deep earth and surface, and also the role of tectonics in modulating Earth's climate. So they're kind of my interests. We were asked to talk about a passion of ours. So one of the things that I wanted to highlight, I mean, there are many, but one of the things I wanted to highlight was really this idea to change the framing and the public perception of the Australian continent as ending at the coastline, and actually extends beyond that, hundreds of kilometres offshore. And so just really changing the framing around that, I think, is important because it is vital. It contains vital information for us to understand our continent. So yeah, that's my intro.
Thanks very much, Maria. Fabian.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks first of all for inviting me to be part of this panel. My name is Fabian Kohlman. I'm the managing director of Lithodat. We are a spatial geoscience data company based in Melbourne. Yeah, my background is I'm a oceanographer. As Tim said, some of you know me from my time way back in Melbourne, where I did a PhD together with Andy and Barry. After that, I worked a little bit more in academia, did a postdoc in Norway before I joined the exploration industry based in UK, where I worked many years building big complex databases for the exploration industry. But then with Brexit looming, I decided to come back to Australia, and we started our own company business here based in Melbourne. And the main drive for us to do so was because we need flexibility in the data, make data available for people, make it usable, make it easy accessible. And that's how we started Lithodat, and we started interacting then with AuScope, so with AGN, the Australian AuScope Geochemistry Network. We had them building a platform based on a platform we developed. So now the data can be stored and shared with the rest of the community. We also engage with the wider community. We got recently an ARC linkage grant together with Dietmar Müller and Maria and Sabine and Sara from the Sydney group, including integrating and plate reconstruction within the whole platform. So all the data can be viewed in a palimpsestic context. And yeah, besides that, I'm also honorary staff at Melbourne Uni. So I'm teaching a course to students. It's a WEEPS course called Spatial Data Analytics and Geoprocessing. We just finished a few weeks ago. And I think it's important to give students also a proper understanding, how data really works, what databases are, how to interact with it. And it's a key for all of us. It doesn't matter if they stay in research or if they go out to industry. So yeah, thanks.
Thanks very much, Fabian. Sara.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks again for inviting me to talk today. So I'm Sara Palenco, and I'm a lecturer at the School of Geosciences at the University of Sydney. And I'm interested in understanding how and why landscapes change through time and space, like the landscapes we see behind me. And I want to do that because I believe that to get that understanding, we can better manage water resources, and we also can implement technologies that can naturally reduce CO2 levels in the atmosphere. And so I'm passionate about changing the way the geosciences are perceived by the general public, and I'm also passionate about the role of the geosciences in achieving the UN sustainability goals.
Thank you, Sara. And Steve.
Hi all. Yeah, so Steve Micklethwaite. Many of you would remember me or know me as a structural geologist by training and background, and I worked for many years in 4 different universities at the interface between that discipline and the minerals exploration industry. And then I established a drone infrastructure platform at Monash, and then left and had spent some time gaining leadership experience and exposure as an exploration manager, actually with a major tier 1 company. Moved to Brisbane, and from following on from that work within industry, I've actually returned to the University of Queensland and am now based at the Sustainable Minerals Institute, and working across all sorts of disciplines, well beyond the geosciences. And my professional passion definitely is helping humanity achieve the sustainable future we're all looking for, but recognizing in that the critical role that minerals are going to have to play, because we have such an enormous deficit in the metals that are needed to achieve a sustainable future. And so the question then becomes, how the heck are we going to find those metals and extract them in a way that is actually much better in terms of our environmental impact and our community impacts than we've had in the past. So that's one role, one passion. And then the other passion, which I'll talk more about today, is just the fun and fantastic opportunities that come from using drones and fancy sensors and data analytics to do far more than we've ever done in the geosciences. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Steve. So look, the way we're going to operate this session is I have a number of questions that I'm going to ask the panelists, and we're going to just run it as a panel format with each of the panelists giving an opportunity to respond to those questions. But we'd also welcome questions from the floor as well. So if you do have any questions or comments or things that you'd like the panelists to address, please put them in the chat. We'll monitor that right through the session. And then we hopefully will have time to put out a call for you to have a discussion at the end of the panel session as well. So my first question is, can all of you on the panel tell us about a time when you innovated in your own work, and maybe tell us what you learned from that and what you think the impact of that work was? And I'm going to start with Maria again.
Yeah, sure. Happy to be first up. So yeah, I mean, this is it's pretty hard to answer because I work really collaboratively. So to think about something that's a bit more about more about me rather than a team was quite difficult. But I guess one thing that comes to mind, and it's not really at the edge of technological innovation, but more about innovative thinking. And that's back towards the end of my PhD and sort of beginning of my first postdoc. And I was working on trying to figure out the tectonic evolution of the Southwest Pacific and how that connected up with what was going on in Southeast Asia. And it's a really complicated place. I'm not going to bore you with the details around that, but I realized that I was handicapped because in one particular area, which was the Eastern Coral Sea, we had a paucity of data. There was not much out there. And so I guess rather than saying, oh, well, no data, therefore nothing to see here, let's go home, I decided to do something about it. And so my training's in marine geophysics, not in geology so much, but I decided to put together a research voyage proposal to go out and collect rocks, not knowing too much about rocks. But part of that was to put together a proposal, but also to put together a team. And Steve was one of the team members there. So nice to see Steve again. And we had a great voyage, and we collected some really key information. I mean, the voyage was funded in the end. It was a pretty scary experience, I would say, you know, being a young female academic leading a research voyage for the first time was quite daunting, but it was absolutely rewarding, and it really changed the trajectory of my career by sort of going a bit outside that box and that the area that I was most comfortable with, and actually thinking innovatively about, okay, well, I can't do anything with the data that's available, so just let's go out and collect that data and figure out what data we actually need to solve the problems that we had. And so, yeah, part of that is really building up a really good team, which we did have. And I guess the things that we learned from that voyage, I mean, there was great science that came out of that, great papers. It also led to several follow-on research voyages where, you know, you go out and you collect data, but that just poses a whole lot of new questions. And so you can, and so we've been quite successful in getting new research voyages. And so we're kind of like old hats a little bit now, after being quite green when we first went out. But part of that voyage also made us realize, you know, the science is really great that comes out of these, you know, new ways of doing things. But the outreach component of that voyage was really quite significant. So I don't know if many of you remember the Sandy Island story that went viral around the world. That stemmed from that voyage. And that was that sort of getting into the understanding of what does the public care about when it comes to geosciences? And so that was a really important outcome of that particular project that we worked on, and that was developed really because we had a roadblock. There was no data, so we had to go out and get it ourselves. Yeah.
Thanks, Maria. And is there anything that you would have done that you've done differently as a result of what you learned from that experience?
Yeah, so what to do differently? Yes, be a bit more prepared, I think. Yes, I mean, it's good to go into things a bit green. I mean, I think that can be a strength, but part of that is that you don't have as much preparation as what, you don't have that experience in preparation. So I think just, not thinking because you haven't done it before, you shouldn't, but actually spending a bit more time preparing, planning, and getting really experienced people as part of your team, which we did have, but yeah, that could have been improved, I would say.
Okay, thank you. I'll change the order a bit, maybe Steve.
I'm glad you went to me second, because rather than talking about myself initially, I just wanted to say Maria did a really fantastic job on that voyage, and yeah, it was such a privilege to be invited in to join her. And one of the great things that you did, Maria, was you put together a mix of very young scientists, PhD students, with very experienced people like Graham Mortimer, which really made the whole project quite successful, because you needed those two different perspectives, the energy and the wise head that knew the system really well. Yeah, so anyway, for myself, around my fourth position, I was down in Tasmania, and I remember mapping in the field and just being frustrated with the amount of data that is available in outcrop and how little we can actually extract from it when you're just using paper and pen. And this was nearly 15 years ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago. So, and then I bumped into someone in the corridor who was carrying the first drone I'd ever seen. And it was a hand-built thing. It was from the Geodesy group. So not a group that we interacted with a lot. And I in terms of collaboration, the first thing I did was I arranged a meeting with them to find out about the technology and how it could be applied. And so from there, I got into the application of drones for field mapping purposes, but very, very quickly realized that the applications of this technology went well beyond structural geology. They could stretch across the whole of the earth sciences and then into environment and into architecture and into art and into biosciences. So the impact of that was 3 positions later, being engaged with this technology, having had several students working on it. I washed up at Monash University and was able to immediately, even before I landed, reach out to people who were mechatronics engineers and data analytics experts in the world of semantic vision, and build a relationship with them before I even got into Monash. And on the basis of that, we then had conversations with a wonderful man who was at the time the provost for research infrastructure, Ian Smith, and we were able to gain traction and get funding, seed funding from the university to run an internal project which was very much interfaculty. And from that interfaculty project, then yourself, Tim, were interested, and we were able to win on the basis of the results of the interfaculty cooperation. We were able to win a LEAF, supported by AuScope, and then ultimately build drone research infrastructure for the whole uni, but with a focus on the earth sciences. So quite a big impact there. In terms of what would I do differently next time, I'm not actually sure. It took me. I've learned a lot of lessons in terms of the importance of building, getting stakeholder buy-in from the ground and the top, from the ground up and the top down, which was a conversation we had yesterday. In order to get some of these bigger projects off the ground, it was really important to have a range of voices that the leadership at uni were interested in. Would sit up and listen to. If you're a cowboy or a lone player with a great idea, it's much less attractive for the university to say, okay, this could go far, relative to someone who's coming forward with a community of voices who are always saying this technology or this idea has application in multiple disciplines, and we're really interested in it. So collectively, we're asking for your support, and I think that's the kind of, seeing that in action, experiencing that was really illuminating for me.
Thanks, Steve. And so would you say that from an outsider looking into your engagement in that space, the thing that strikes me is the passion that you have for that technology and that some other people working in that space have? So would you say that is a critical aspect of building that platform up from the ground up?
Yes, I guess it is. I hadn't really thought about it, Tim, but look, enthusiasm is always goes a long way. Mainly because, maybe not necessarily enthusiasm being the key thing, but the key thing is relationship. And I'm naturally an extrovert. I can naturally get excited by things, and people warm to that. But you don't necessarily have to be the most. You don't necessarily need to have that as a characteristic, as long as you are able to develop the skills of building good, strong, trusting relationships and getting buy-in from an early stage to a vision. Yeah. Then that's what's really key. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Sara, do you have some experiences you would be able to share with us?
Yeah, sure. So I guess that's similar to Maria's experience, as in not technological innovations, but more how to move forward with my career trajectory. So for example, when I was doing my postdoc, most of the people in the group were doing numerical modeling, and I wanted to combine numerical modeling with data, but I just didn't have the budget or the scope to do a full-blown project on uranium lead dating. to better understand the sediment provenance of pilot drainages in WA. So I only had a postdoc, right? So I had to be realistic also with the time frame. So I contacted GA, Geoscience Australia, and asked if I could have access to the data, since is data paid by the taxpayers. So and also if I could have access to predated zircons, so I could do targeted analysis of key samples as opposed to have a whole spectrum of samples, just a few that could really define the diagnosis, or like give a diagnostic result. And yeah, Geoscience Australia was quite supportive, despite the fact that I was straight out of my PhD and that my background was not specifically on uranium lead dating. And yeah, so I ended up getting more data also from Western Australia through the Geological Survey, plus access to key zircons from Geoscience Australia. So I was quite happy to see how supportive the survey and Geoscience Australia were. But I guess, it makes sense, right? Since they are publicly funded institutions. And so one of our industry partners, which was co-sponsoring the Basin Genesis Hub, was quite happy with the provenance analysis, even though that was not originally planned, but it was like a add-on to the project. And I was so pleased that I ended up publishing the results as a geology paper. So it was a win-win for everyone. So I guess what Steve was saying, also having enthusiasm and then relating, or like knowing who to contact, I guess is key for having successful collaborations. And yeah, so I guess the take-home message is also don't be afraid of door knocking.
Yeah. I think it's interesting too, like all three of you so far, and I don't want to preempt what Fabian tells us, but all three of you have identified that innovation and collaboration need was driven by a gap. So it was either a funding gap, a resources gap, or a data gap, or, an inability to record certain amount of data. So it's, I guess, part of the challenge is identifying what that gap is and recognizing that you need to do something slightly different than maybe business as usual to try to address it.
Absolutely. And I think that also a lot of the people have seen that it's about strategy and money, but a lot of the times it's about the team and who. So instead of how can I do it, it's like who can you help me doing it? I think that's key. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. Fabian.
Yeah, thanks. I think I will continue a little bit where Sara started. So the gap of finding data, that's something I experienced as well when I did, my PhD and then did a postdoc in Norway. And you start in an area and you look for other published data around there, especially when you do semochronology studies. Have other people been working? Is there geochronology data in the area? So you have to do an intensive search, and it's often hard to get data. You find some data, and then it's not in a format you can really use. So that's a tough part of the work. I think most of us experience working with similar data sets. But then when I joined industry, and I joined this big hydrocarbon company based in the UK, and you suddenly had this massive amount of data. So it was a complete different world. But saying that, yes, a lot of data, but the data still was not sometimes in a really usable format. You had to spend a lot of time in cleaning these data, structuring it, make it actually usable. Yeah. And a lot of that data we used, and they still came in these fat files, massive tables, spreadsheets, not connected. So me and my team, we started thinking about ways how to make the data usable. So we really started building some relational databases, relational contexts, but then working for these big multinational companies, innovation is limited because you're restricted in change. Everything you want to make better or faster, it has to pass so many levels of management, and it's usually often at some stage reaches a point where it's gets shut down, and then it can't happen. And that was quite disappointing also for our clients. Clients were asking for some of these new features, but they couldn't be developed then because, you know, we had these limitations. Even though they pray, oh, innovation, we have to innovate, but it's limited. And yeah, that made me quite frustrated after a while. And I thought, look, we can do things much better. And that's when I decided, okay, let's do things different, start my own business. And we set it up from beginning on in a way that we know it's future-proof. It's a relational database. All data we go in is structured. It's easy accessible and can be used by people. And I think that's the way you should start thinking of data and make it easy. Like now we have this platform which is public available, and when users go in and you look in an area where you start working, it's much easier for you to find data, and it's discoverable, and it saves you a lot of time and effort. And I think that makes all our life easier. And we need to learn these thinking. And when you hit barriers and limitations in your innovation, not out of your control, you have to find a way. Sometimes it's a big step you have to take. For me, it was like, okay, I resigned from a really well-paid, good job and took the risk with my whole family moving to Australia and start from scratch on. But that's the only way sometimes you can keep innovation going and keep ideas building by starting around.
Thank you very much. So look, I think that you know, all of your answers to those questions are really interesting, and they tell us a story about how you have all you know, approached challenges that you've identified and ways that you've innovated to try to address those challenges. I guess I'm also interested, and rather than going around the table, I'll just, you know, ask if any of you have a response to this question. Maybe just put your hand up or just turn your microphone on and start speaking. But I guess I'm interested in ways that potential collaborators might have approached you, or ways that you might have been involved in a project that's quite different to what you're normally used to working in because it's been brought to your attention and maybe something that you hadn't thought of before, and then how you might have adapted to that situation. Does anybody have an experience along those lines? Steve?
Yeah, actually a really good one. So when I landed at the Sustainable Minerals Institute, having left industry, there was a client who came to us and said that the Institute has been doing such a good job in the area of thinking about, you know, how to change our approach to projects and how to bring in a holistic approach to thinking about extraction, discovery, extraction, and closure. What we want you to do is apply that to a specific project we have. And I was new, but the director, my boss, Rick Valenta, through this to me. So it was completely, I mean, I obviously was coming from industry, so I had that experience, and I could speak both languages, but it's an area that was completely outside the geosciences. And what we did was we ended up working on this project, which is in the Arctic. It's a mineral resource which is buried under a lake in the middle of nowhere, and there are indigenous community issues, there are groundwater issues. Climate change is going to affect that part of the world far more than the rest of the globe. 30% increase, higher rate of increase of temperature in those Arctic zones than in the equatorial regions. So you can imagine what that does to permafrost, you can imagine what it does to wildlife, so on. And yeah, so I ended up putting together a proposal, and I actually went to 7 different centers. I worked with scientists and researchers from the social science dimensions, from groundwater, with hydrological expertise, with mineral processing expertise, energy expertise, and a few others who, you know, I can't even remember now. safety and health and things like that. The company went for it. They funded it to the tune of about $400,000, a 6-month project, really, really tight. And we ended up being able to show that bringing all these ideas together in a holistic manner and thinking from the beginning to the end in a more integrated way than industry traditionally does, that if they made their operations based on certain types of renewable energy and took into account the caribou and entered into some good relations and equity partnerships with the local indigenous communities, then this project could fly. And something that was $1.5 billion in debt by the end of extraction became $500 million profitable. But that wasn't the actual only measure of success. The actual success was the fact that we could potentially do this in a way that was far more sustainable and low footprint on the environment, and would result in the kind of critical metals we're going to need for our future. Now, the thing that made that really work was, in this case, the idea was pushed to us. So the client really wanted it. There was a real need. So it wasn't just me coming up with an idea and going out and then getting buy-in. There was an identified need, and so it was very much a two-way interaction. And then the way we set it up was, I ended up having, I ran workshops with the team right at the beginning. We had a middle workshop and an end workshop. We had some tools which we used to make sure that the different disciplines were able to speak together and see how they all link together. And I had a weekly meeting with the client where we gave weekly updates on what we've done and the progress being made, and we're meeting with them. And really interestingly, from their side, is they did the same thing. So I've had a lot of experience of working with industry, and one of the big frustrations from the research sector is you come up with some good ideas and good results, and it may even be received enthusiastically, but personnel change, the report gets shoved onto a shelf, it doesn't really go anywhere. It doesn't result in business transformation or genuine impact. In this case, that dynamic was changed because the company structured a whole team. There wasn't just a single point of contact. There was a whole team of people on their side who were absorbing the information as we generated it, and then implementing it and giving us feedback and asking us to improve this or correct that, or what does this mean? And so, that's really the end of the story, but it was...
No, fascinating example. Thank you. And I guess I'm interested, based on that sort of multidisciplinary group that were brought together, did you have challenges with that common language like we talked about yesterday? How did you land on the language that you used?
When we talk about common language, I'm guessing what Leah yesterday was really saying is that, obviously there's jargon, there's terms that geoscientists use that sociologists don't use. So that the common language there is just an educational thing where you say, well, this is what this means. But there's another type of common language, which is the way a social scientist approaches a problem is completely different to the way that we think as scientists or as engineers think. Engineers have a very focused methodological set of goals and stage gates which they go through to achieve their aim, and then it's all done and dusted. The social scientists are asking sometimes very uncomfortable questions and using they're very precise about the language. They were always picking me up on things I would say that implied certain assumptions about, the way that you engage with the Inuit community, for instance, or legislation.
So I have a friend who, this is totally different, but again, it's about that different language. I have a friend who got a lectureship in Japan and didn't speak Japanese, but was given 12 months basically to learn Japanese, and learnt it and then started lecturing in Japanese. He was much smarter than me. But after he did that, he started writing his papers in Japanese because that language for him was a better way of describing, the science that he understood. So, and that's just a spoken language as opposed to a, set of terms that we use in different disciplines. And so it is fascinating how you can communicate things differently using different languages.
Yeah. And so I guess the lesson there was it takes time to get that. Like I actually had to learn to listen to what were sometimes uncomfortable conversations and bring parties together that you think could be in conflict around a table to discuss, okay, well, this is what you mean and that's what they mean, and where's the common ground.
Okay, fantastic. Look, I might move on to the next question because we're running through the time, and I do want to give everybody in the chat an opportunity to ask questions or to speak themselves. So we will give you all time to put up your hands at the end if you want to say something or address anything to the panelists. But I guess I'd like to go back to the panelists and ask each of them, particularly what mindset sort of skills and settings they think you need to innovate. And particularly what you need when you come up against a roadblock. So I might start with Sara for this one.
Yeah, so think outside the box. So I think that it's important to learn what has worked and what hasn't worked for other people. But the problem is that using that approach all the time might not work for some of us, for example, who have had different career paths. Mm-hmm. So that works for other people might not work for people like me, right? So for example, at the end of my postdoc, I didn't have anything lined up, even though I had applied for jobs and grants. And it was also the middle of the pandemic. So I decided to apply for a Fulbright fellowship, which not many people in the geosciences do. Mm-hmm. I think because it's a fellowship for all disciplines, not just the sciences. So I guess people are not used to applying to multidisciplinary fellowships. It doesn't have to, the fellowship didn't have to have a multidisciplinary component, but it meant that you were competing with people from all disciplines. And so, so then I was successful, and that fellowship has opened up many opportunities, and it broke the roadblocks that I had. So I guess choose your own path, make your own path. Learn from more people's experiences, but make your own path.
Okay, thank you. Maria, what do you?
Yeah, so I would say, I think that mindset and attitude is key. So, rather than accepting the parameters that you have in front of you, the boundaries, and similar to what Sara was saying, right? Rather than accepting those, like have the confidence to push beyond them. I can make an analogy to, pushing the Australian continent beyond the coastline, to link that back. But it really is that idea, don't accept the boundaries. And then also when you come up with roadblocks, they are opportunities, and think of them as opportunities. I remember going to an early career and mid-career researcher sort of workshop that our wonderful former friends at Macquarie Uni organised many years ago. And Brian Kennett well, they're still friends, but, former colleagues at Macquarie. And Brian Kennett gave a talk there. And one of the things that I took away from that talk, it was just one thing. And he said, always have opportunities in your top drawer. So if you have ideas, write them up as proposals. And one day, you're going to have something on hand to be able to submit to a funding agency to actually get that project going. And I've taken that forward throughout my career since, and it's done wonders. I mean, the G-Plates app is a good example of that. We had that idea to develop a G-Plates app. So I wrote that up as a proposal with a budget without having a funding avenue for that. And then the AuScope Opportunity Fund came along. So I think that's just a really good example of, roadblocks or opportunities, and make sure you're in a good space to take advantage of opportunities. Yeah.
Great advice. Thank you, Maria. And I can attest to that because I got an email from Brian just a few hours ago, and I can tell you he's still got a top drawer full of ideas. So even in retirement. Fabian.
Yeah, I mean, I can only approve what Sara and Maria said. You absolutely need an open mindset to approach problems differently. Be open for new ideas. And what I think is also a really important component is you need to be able to take risks. There is a risk factor in there, because you're stepping into unknown waters sometimes when you innovate something new, and people are often scared to do that extra step, because you go in uncharted waters, and sometimes people are not ready to take that risk. But you have to be able or to take those risks to do proper innovation, to come up with something new, and that, I think that's the only way you are able to get it. And yeah, of course you need the fundings to do so, and then the ideas and collaborators jumping on that idea, but you still need to first doing that step that you want to do something new, and that you are able and willing to do it and commit to it, and not pull back. I think that's very important for innovating.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. All right. Just before I go to you, Steve, we don't have any questions in the chat. I'm going to throw it to the floor in a minute, but if you do have anything that you want to add or that you want to ask, please put your hands up now, so that when we finish this little discussion, I'll be able to see who wants to add to the discussion. And we'd really welcome any reflections that anybody else on the Zoom has, or that would want to add, or things that you think we could learn from, or ideas that you have. We'd really, really welcome that. So Steve, I'll throw to you before we finish up.
Yeah, I don't have a great deal to add. I thought Sara's and Maria's responses were really good. Other than to give one story, which was I had a roadblock early in my career when I was working on, the application of earthquake physics as an exploration tool. We had a client, we had a sponsor for the project, and they just weren't responsive. And they were in America, so we tried for 6 months trying to get some information from them and get interaction, even though they were putting all this money in. And in the end, I just got on a plane, flew there, and without having any, positive response, and just went and knocked on the door and spoke with them. So I think there are some, it depends on what the roadblock is, but face-to-face communication seems to really open up avenues that are often closed to you otherwise.
Yeah, thank you very much. We don't have any hands up. I welcome anybody who wants to add to this conversation, give us your own thoughts or ideas. I guess, excellent. Malcolm.
Hi, I was just typing in it's easier to speak than to type.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to make a comment. I was really gratified to hear several people mention the need to think outside the box to be innovative. And I completely and totally agree. I just want to contrast that with the notion that when you write grants, being outside the box and innovative is often a negative. I don't wish to be too cynical, because you get those sort of feedbacks of, well, this has never been done before, so therefore we shouldn't fund it because it's too high risk, etc., etc. So I just wanted to contrast those two and sort of think there is that missing line of, creative entrepreneurialness that I'm sure many people here have in translating those sort of exciting ideas into something which appears less risk-free and getting funding, if you even need funding. I think for me, the most interesting and possibly the best work I've ever done was completely unfunded. So, and therefore, you're not constrained by funding.
Yeah. And I think a great example, and it goes to something Maria said before, about her naivety, I guess, when she did that original project. So Malcolm and Graham Beardsmore and I and a couple of other people maybe here were involved in a project a number of years ago with NICTA before they became Data 61, and it was about looking at geothermal, using different geophysical methods to identify geothermal resources. And it was most of the project team were these really, really fast, really, really smart, really, really young mathematicians who were totally unencumbered by any geoscientific knowledge. And whilst it was sort of frustrating, it was also really refreshing to hear them ask questions of us that, you know, we just took this stuff for granted. You know, they were doing these inversions of magnetics and gravity, and they were saying, well, you know, what's the relationship between magnetic susceptibility and density? And we're like, well, there isn't one. And they're like, no, there is. We can see it in the data. Come on, explain it. And then you've got to start thinking about it. And so it's like, you know, that absolute naivety actually really can stimulate some innovative thinking. Maria,
sorry, Tim. That's I was just going to jump in if I may, because that NICTA project's just been resonating all morning with me. So I'm glad you brought it up. The one image that sticks with me is when I visited the NICTA office up in New South Wales, up in Sydney, and one of those computer scientists had a handwritten sticky note on his desk saying "rocks have edges." And I asked him about that because being computer scientists and mathematicians, they just wanted to model everything as continuous functions, and find analytical solutions to these continuous functions. So when they're confronted with this reality that rock formations have hard boundaries, that sort of threw all their thinking out. So that was to the point where they had to put a sticky note up to remind themselves that rocks have edges. So that, and there was the whole language issue, so trying to deal with jargon, which are very different between computer science and earth science. But that was it was a hugely rewarding project at the end of the day. And unfortunately, Malcolm, I have in my top drawer an idea that we should restart Obsidian and sort of rebuild it. It's because it's just disappeared, I think.
Well, one of the other fascinating things about that project was because, again, like, you know, maybe I was at that point where I was starting to get old and everybody looked really young to me, but the people that were working on that, they literally looked like they were 19. But one of the ways they taught themselves about geophysics was by building this Minecraft world, right? And they embedded gravity meters into this Minecraft world so that they could actually image the subsurface within Minecraft. And it was like this fascinating way for them to understand how gravity works. It was just blew my mind. It was very, very clever.
They were very smart people.
Maria.
Yeah, I was just going to follow on what Malcolm was saying. And yeah, I mean, it is hard to get some of these more, you know, out of the box ideas funded. And sometimes we shouldn't target those bigger grants. Sometimes just small seed funding can go a really long way, you know, like the AuScope Opportunity Funds. I think that's a good avenue to be able to test some of these ideas. And then that can then go on to build into much larger projects. So actually valuing small amounts of seed funding and recognizing that sometimes you don't need much in order to get things going.
Yeah, fantastic point.
I completely echo Maria's comment because I think that because ARC or big grants are just so constrained, it's just hard to get them to start, right? So it's like you perhaps need that small, not so constrained grants to then make it into a more conceptualized and reasonable project. So you cannot jump, right? Like you need a springboard.
So remembering as well, you know, that AuScope can't fund research, but we can fund investment into research infrastructure that supports these activities. These are the things that we need to take into this conversation after our break that Rebecca's going to lead. Because, as I said, we do want to build something. We want to create something that supports this sort of innovative thinking, collaboration, whatever it is. So keep these ideas bubbling, and hopefully we can discuss them in the groups after our break.
If I may add something,
Fabio, go for it.
It really resonates. Everything has been said. It resonates with me. But you know, here in Malcolm, I agree with him. There are two ways to think out of the box. One is coming out with out of the box ideas, and of course they are not funded unless you proceed with the small seeds. But there is another way which is out of the box and really works really well. So when you essentially put together people from other fields, and we've been talking about people, Malcolm himself, mathematician turned geophysicist, we're all the same. So we are something turned into something else. So this is usually a good way to innovate. in a methodological way, in a way that the infrastructures above they find a little less risky. So it's not new ideas, they can turn out to be a big flop, but it's new methodologies, like just bridging over different fields and creating, just moving out of the core of the fields and moving out to the edge and meet some other people from other fields, which is essentially what we do in AuScope, isn't it? That's a little less risky, Malcolm.
Does anybody else have anything they'd like to add? No? All right, I guess I've got one other thing that I think I heard the other day. So I was listening to Steve Beresford's Exploration Radio podcast the other day, and they were talking about innovation, particularly relating to mineral discovery on Mars and on the moon, working with NASA and others. And it interested me that they made a comment about innovation within the mineral exploration world being stifled by the fact that they have this cyclic investment cycle. So, you know, we get these 7-year cycles or 5-year cycles or whatever they are. And there's lots of money at a time when things are booming, and then that money dries up when things are tanking. But that's the point at time when we should be investing in innovation, because we need it to be ready for the next cycle. But because we only get these sort of 2-year or 3-year blocks of time when there's funding available, it sort of is stifling innovation in that space. And I think the same is true in a sense in the academic space as well. You know, I guess there's a bit more continuity and there's a bit more, you know, it's not like it's cyclic like that, but it is this cycle of continually trying to apply for grants and the grants finishing and then going through another cycle and coming up with a new idea and running out of time. So I am interested if people have thoughts about whether the funding, obviously funding availability issue is an issue, but whether that cyclicity in things affects innovation in your view, and if there's anything that, you know, we can do or lobby for to try to address that realistically. Tumbleweeds. Malcolm. Your hand up, Malcolm.
Oh, sorry.
Yep, go for it.
Capping out for me. Is that me?
Yeah, that's you. Yeah.
I just make a comment that this came up some time ago when I was talking to people from Halliburton, who are a very wealthy company in the US, and they said, "Oh, when the good times are here, we're terrible at research. We fund anything. A guy with 2 sticks and an idea, but it's only when the price goes down and attention is focused do we really get properly involved." And so I think there's some truth in that. So
Okay.
you know, when funds are scarce, attention is, I mean, I'm not saying they're ever really plentiful in our field, but when you don't have much largesse, you focus and are more innovative. So
yeah,
you know,
and that's true. And that
perspective.
That goes to the point that Sara and Maria were making before, that, you know, they had to be innovative because they didn't have capacity just to do whatever. They had to be innovative to make use of what they had. Yeah, very good. I don't think we've got any questions in the chat, so maybe we're almost at time anyway. So look, maybe I'll wrap us up there. So I'd like to start by just, I guess, reflecting briefly. I think that that was a fantastic session, and it's just really good to hear from all of you. In particular, I'd like to thank the panel. So thank you all for making the time to discuss your experiences and your views with us. But thank you everybody who was involved in the chat as well. It's really important to learn from each other's experience, and it's really important to learn from different people's experience too, because, you know, often we look to our professors or whoever it might be and think that they have all the experience, but I think that every one of us has experience about innovating, and often it's the more junior people that maybe are willing to take those risks more. So I think that we need to learn from everyone. And so I thank you all very much for being involved. Okay, so we're going to take a break now. We're going to we'll leave the Zoom open and we'll just mute everything, and we'll be back at 1:45. And I would please request that you all come back because we really do want your input into that session. Rebecca is going to lead us through it, and we're going to get your ideas on ways that we can do stuff differently going forward within AuScope and beyond. So thank you all. We'll see you soon.